program. And this mic is also working. Well, welcome back after lunch break. Thank you for coming back. I know that the sunshine outside is very tempting, but I can promise you that instead of the sunshine outside, you will get the literary stars inside, which is much nicer. We're now moving from a more theoretical discussion to a celebration of the writing itself. And this session is called Arts and Activism. And basically what we are trying to address here in this session is something that we've been doing over the past 2 days, namely look at politics and the realm of literary practice, and also look at literary production as a form of political activism. But of course we will also make space for any of the issues and themes emerging from the writing themselves. And I'm very, very happy to introduce this panel here, which brings together an exciting range of writers from all corners of Africa, namely South Africa, Uganda, and UK, Somalia, respectively. We've changed the order of things, so I can continue. Before I introduce Nadifa, I would just like to make a quick announcement regarding the family photo that Susan would like to have taken with all of us. And this is taking place after the panel discussion from, help me now, please. 4:30 to 5:30. So it's 5:30 we will have a family photo. 5:30. So please be back by 5:30 so that you will all be on the picture, and the more the merrier, you know that. Now it's my very great pleasure to introduce the first writer of this session, Nadifa Mohamed. Nadifa comes from London, but she was born in Somalia and moved to the UK at the age of 4. She studied history and politics at St Hilda's College, Oxford, and after finishing her degree, she started working on a novel that is based on her father's experience in East Africa in the 1930s and 40s. This book was published in 2010 under the title Black Mamba Boy, and we have 2 editions here. This is the American edition, and Mariah, if you would be so kind to just hold up the other one. This is the British edition. They differ slightly. The novel won the Betty Trask Prize and was shortlisted for the Guardian First Book Award, the John, and now you will have to help me out, it's Welsh, I don't speak Welsh, the John Llewellyn Rhys Prize, thank you. The Dylan Thomas Prize, the Pen Open Book Award, and was also longlisted for the Orange Prize. And I know that Nadifa has just submitted the manuscript of her second novel to her publisher. Yeah, so we're all waiting for it. And she's also involved in writing a film script for a film project that is a documentary on people from the Somali diaspora returning to Somalia. And without further ado, I'll hand over to you. I'm very happy that you made it to Bayreuth. Thank you for coming.
I'm very happy to be here. I met Christine in London actually, and after a false start last year, I'm now finally here. As Christine said, my book is based on my father's real-life experiences. He was born in 1925-26, we're not quite sure, to a nomadic family in Somalia. His family had camels and other livestock. His mother was 17 when she had him, and his father was maybe 19, and they'd eloped. They'd run away from the family to get married and then come back. So they were a slightly rebellious family from the beginning. He ended up moving to Aden in Yemen with his mother in 1936. So he grew up on the streets of Aden. No, he lived in Aden from the age of 6, and while his mother worked in a coffee factory, he lived on the streets. While his mother worked in a coffee factory, he lived on the streets and brought himself up. He then returned to East Africa to find his long-lost father, who disappeared after just a couple of years with his family. So this book covers that journey and also the time after that. It's very closely based on his real life, but it does depart from it at points. So I'm going to read you a section in Eritrea. This is just after the Second World War. He was fighting for the Italian army as a child soldier, and he saw the slaughter, he saw the kind of the attitude that the Italian soldiers and the Italian army had towards their Ascaris, and he just ran away, he deserted, and now his life is kind of listless, he doesn't have any direction anymore, but something happens which is quite good. Jarmuth waited a long time for Abdi, hoping that he would come around the bend one day, a little dusty, a little thirsty, but otherwise well. Sometimes casualties were brought to Tessane on stretchers after stepping on mines or triggering booby traps. Jarmuth would rush out of the shop to see the victim's face, but there were always high-cheekboned Eritreans. Jarmuth wanted to search for Abdi, but the countryside was now a battleground for militias and shifter bandits. So just one thing I forgot to explain is that while he was fighting in the Second World War, he was with two of his friends that he'd known in Aden, Abdi and Shivan. Jarmuth wanted to search for Abdi, but the countryside was now a battleground for militias and shifter bandits. Shivan's grave was a meeting place for robbers, who gathered under his shade to share their loot. Jarmuth wondered if Shivan's ghost had called them to him, his spirit sitting beside them in delight as they counted and plotted. After bandits attacked Hakim's shop, shoving their pistols into Jarmuth's face and grabbing sacks of grain and money, Jarmuth remonstrated with Shivan, and they never returned. Ordinary Eritreans were also in rebellious mood, now that Italian power had been revealed as nothing more than a magician's trick. Every man and boy had a pistol, rifle, or grenade. When Italian prisoners of war passed through Tessane, they hid their faces from the men they had tortured and the women they had raped. Even after the carnage at Keren, the ascendancy of the European was jealously guarded by the British, who pampered the Italians and protected them from any vengeance. When bandits attacked Italian villas or shops, British troops conducted house-to-house searches until weapons and suspects were handed over. Jarmuth lived a simple existence in Hakim's shop, quietly watching the world pass by, everyday routines, miracles and tragedies filling his days. He felt no joy or misery, just a deep yearning for all the things he had lost. The war was over, but it had taken everything with it, and reduced his world to an oasis of peace surrounded by a scorched wasteland. Former Ascaris came to the store and made chit-chat with him. Some drank too much, some pretended to have forgotten all about the war, but still there was the never-ending inventory of lost souls. So-and-so died of shrapnel wounds. Tall Mohamed was hanged. Hassan was ambushed by Shifta. Samatar went missing. Jarmuth could not stop listening, even though he was sick of death. He wanted life in its purest form, like birds had, not this stunted thing that the Ascaris endured. Jarmuth asked the men to look out for Abdi, and to tell him that Jarmuth Gorde was waiting for him in Tessane, but Abdi had disappeared, flown away on invisible wings. Jarmuth listened to the neighbour's cockerel sound its alarm, its crowing muffled by the other morning sounds. Buckets of water sloshing, fires crackling, men and women greeting one another, mules braying, babies crying. Hawa, an old woman wrapped in red cotton, came limping into the store. She heaved and panted, on her back a sack of chickpeas, and her muscular arms threw the heavy load at Jarmuth's feet. Good peas, the best I've grown in a while. I want a special gift from you, my little Somali, she said, holding out her hand. If I were the boss, you could have anything in the shop. Hawa waited for Jarmuth to check the sack and hand over her payment of sugar. He was always generous, giving an extra spoonful to his regulars. Hawa tweaked his cheek and placed the packet under her arm. It would take another hour for her to walk back to Gerset and her home in the Kunama settlement. The sky was clouded over, threatening a downpour. Stay here, Hawa. Wait for it to come and go, said Jarmuth, lighting a cigarette, phosphorus and tobacco sharp in his nose. Hawa trundled back to him, closing her eyes to breathe in the smoke. Give me one, or I'll report you to the boss. Jarmuth broke the cigarette in half and gave her the lit end. the last one, he said apologetically. He thrust the other half behind his ear and checked for rotten fruit in the piles, delivered by local farmers that morning. Most of the bananas and oranges were stunted little specimens, bruised and misshapen. He removed the ones that were overripe and shared them with Hawa. As they ate, the rain began, the first real downpour of the rainy season, and the wind blew in, spraying them with water. Awate came running in on his way home from the schoolhouse. He was drenched, his thin clothes plastered to his body. Jama, I came top in my class today. Teacher said if I carry on like this, he will send me to his brother's big school in Kessala. Hawa ululated, and smoke escaped in spirals from her mouth. Manshallah, Awate, you will go to Kessala. But try yourself, you don't want to get sick, Jama admonished. Awate lived near the shop with a distant aunt of his father's, but he visited Jama every day to grab sweets and share his achievements. His face had filled out, and he looked nothing like the rave Jama had found. Hakim, the shopkeeper, at first kept a close eye on Jama. I've had boys work for me and rob me blind. My rule is any thieves get a taste of my switch. He never had to use it on Jama, and soon left him in charge when he went to buy stock 50 miles away in Kessala. Although he had a larger store for miles, with villages nearby supplying him with sorghum, millet, maize and sesame, Hakim was not a natural capitalist, constantly giving his spoiled children money from the day's takings and keeping the best meat for his family. Jama sometimes thought that Hakim had a shop only so that he could have an endless supply of delicacies to shove into his small, wet mouth. Tessane was a hub of international trade. Loot from the homes of Italian colonists was traded for goods from Egypt, and Ascaris sold their Italian weapons to Abyssinian shifter. Kunama farmers and taciturn Takaruri hunters exchanged their produce for cloth, coffee and sugar. The Sudanese presiding over this mercantile frenzy like referees at a wrestling match. They opened caravanserai and bazaars and sold their sizzling kebabs at every corner. Jama was known to them and everyone else as Little Somali who could speak many languages. Jama picked up Kunama from Hawa and would translate for the rural women in disputes with Hakim over the quality of their vegetables or the extent of their debts. All kinds of people came into the shop. Once a man burst in, carrying a spear and shield, wearing the lion skin of an Amhara warrior, only to shout, "Hurriya, Inunyo!" to Jama. He was no Amhara, but a full-blooded Somali, a Habrionis man from around Hargeisa, who had ended up in Abyssinia and fought against the Italians. He took off the sweaty lion pelt and chatted with Jama about the desert, camels, and his plan to join the Royal Navy in Egypt. Before sunset, he picked up his mane, spear and shield and disappeared towards Sudan. Jama spent 2 years working for Hakim without pay. He traded his labour for something to eat and somewhere to sleep. On that coffee-scented floor, he became a man, his arms and legs no longer able to fit comfortably in his nook beneath the counter. He felt like an elephant trapped in a goat pen. At night, he thought about trying his luck somewhere else. Hakim was often kind, but he was also a grouchy merchant who muttered complaints under his thick walrus moustache. When Jama finally made up his mind to leave, Hakim threw his big hands in the air and said frantically, "Haven't I been good to you? What more could you want?" But Hakim reached into his pocket and gave Jama exactly £2 for his 730 days of toil. Awate cried when Jama told him he would be leaving and held onto his long legs to slow him down, but Jama cried him off. "I'll be back, Awate. You can be my coolie when I open a store," he promised. Jama explored the local villages, looking for one isolated and poor enough to lack a Sudanese store. It was a bleak journey. Roads were still blocked by burnt-out tanks, minefields were hidden under weeds, and bones jutted from shallow graves. Jama found Foka, nestled in a lush valley. It was a tiny village with barely 20 families who trekked 2 hours to Tessane for textiles, medicines, paraffin. When the little Somali came to visit and spoke of his plans, they nearly nailed him to a stake to stop him escaping. Among the matriarchal Kunamas Women like Ambaro, Chino, and Aurala were everywhere, bossing him about, giving him unwanted advice on how to build his stall, teasing him about his exotic looks, his thin, girly face and wavy hair. He had emerged from the underworld into this land of Amazons. The villagers were excited to have a foreigner in their midst, and Jama's stall, made from torn-down Italian billboards and covered with palm fronds, became the talking shop, tavern, and in the evenings, dance hall. Young men, tired and sweaty, would come in from the fields and untangle their muscles in wacky dances they named the pissing dog, the hungry chicken, the rutting ram, all the while getting limp on honeymead and running up large debts at Jama's stall. The elders would occasionally perform epic sagas about the ancient queens who had come to Eritrea as nomads and been seduced by this fertile land. To satisfy his customers' desires and avoid the high British taxes, Jama would hire a camel and take the risky night route through the desert between Tessene and Kessala. He cherished these expeditions, his pale clothes glowing in the moonshine and sand grains glinting like diamonds in his path, and he felt like he had gone back in time to when his own ancestors sought out new lands. The white-hot stars were so bright they nearly burned him, and the moonlit dunes would undulate and swim as he was rocked into somnolence on the camel's back. Jama would be jolted awake when he heard the laughs of hyenas following him, the snap of their jaws as they bit at the camel's long, thin legs. Smugglers were a delicacy to local hyenas, and on this long, isolated stretch, if a smuggler was thrown off his startled camel, he would have no hope of rescue. They would pounce and leave nothing behind. With smuggled Sudanese cigarettes hidden under his clothes, Jama returned triumphantly to the village. He was never caught by the Sudanese police. The crunch of a policeman's footsteps or his smokeless cough carried for miles on the desert air, and if Jama heard anything, he would find another smuggler's track. With these nocturnal journeys, Jama doubled his takings. He expanded the stall until second-hand shoes hung from their laces above his head. Paraffin lamps glowered like SWAT policemen at his side, and homemade perfumes, oily love potions, wafted out of scavenged glass bottles. Everything Jama sold brought the glamour of the outside world to Foka. Under the eternal woods of overgrown baobabs and fragrant tamarinds, a village was being shaken out of a daydream. The magic of oil and coal made life easier, faster, dirtier, and Jama's stall offered as much of the outside world as he could carry. When the harvest was brought in, people gasped at the lewd fecundity of the earth. Carrots, long and rampant, jumped out of the soil. Red, saucy tomatoes pouted from their vines. Emerald, citrine, and ruby peppers shone from dowdy wicker baskets. And the lambs, shouting and boasting all the way to market. Women carried baskets full of eggs as big as fists on their heads to Tessene. Foka, only Foka had been blessed, and the rest of the villages in the Kanama country revealed sullen sacks of gnarled vegetables and sour fruit at market. The people were angry. The farmers of Foka were keeping the lucky Somali to themselves. Women met in all the villages. Hushed, secret midnight conferences took place. Poison him with cobra spit, and then bring him here for the cure, counselled one old woman. In another village, a woman offered herself as the honey trap. But in Garset, Howard told them to offer Jama land in return for his sorcery. Jama accepted Howard's offer of 2 acres, but promised the people of Foka that he would keep his stall there. He borrowed a mule from a neighbour, and with his blanket, tools, and cooking utensils on the mule's back, he headed for Garset. The women had cleared the ground for him, rich soil, damp to the touch, combed through like his mother's black hair. It was a beautiful sight to behold, the first real wealth of his life. He paced along the perimeter, measuring the distance from one corner to another. It was a large, open-handed gift from the women, and he kissed Howard's hands in gratitude. The women built him a hut, singing Akaran Ashamane as they worked, "Don't let your friend down." They finally left him alone to work his sorcery, but he didn't know what to do. Protected from view by exuberant banana trees, he bent down and picked up handfuls of soil and rubbed it against his arms and legs. It was cool and soothed his hot skin. He brought it to his nose, its smelled of trees in their breath. He tasted it, iron and blood. In his revelry, he walked around Gerset. The women smiled and waved as he rode. He felt wonderful. Their beautiful village, untouched by war, hidden from Ferengi maps. They stopped to welcome him. There were no titles in Gerset, no masters or lords, not even misses. Respect was given freely, equally, generously. All were descendants of Queen Konami. According to custom, only the women and older men had met to decide which plot to give Jama. The youths would learn of his presence when they returned from grazing their cows, but Jama was assured that they would give him no trouble. And there was quiet, apart from the shouts of dogs, coughs of goats, and the chuckling of lambs. Tired and thirsty, he reached the village shop. He pushed the curtain aside, his footsteps soft, padded by unswept dust. A girl sat behind a crooked wooden counter, her head on her arm, snoring with fat flies buzzing around her head. She jumped to his approach, quickly wiping the drool from her chin. She was beautiful. Slow black eyes and red ripe lips atop the long neck of a Guranook. Her pure brown skin set off by yards of carnelian and amber beads. She had been polished with butter and cream. Meeting her startled antelope gaze, Jama asked for a cup of milk, and with swift dancing steps, she went to the old cow in the backyard and milked a cupful. "Good afternoon," said Jama, his heartbeat skittering. The girl nodded to him. She emanated light like a saint on a church wall, but her expression was more suspicious than beatific. "Where have you come from?" she finally asked, a voice deeper than he expected. He could smell honey on her breath. "You name it, I've been there," he smiled. She smiled back, and that was it.
Should be on? Can you hear me? Well, thank you so much, Nadifa, for sharing this really wonderful part of your novel with us. And I would like now to invite you to ask questions about the novel, about Nadifa's writing and her other work.
Thank you for your reading. Could you please tell us how you started writing after graduating from university? Because I heard you studied poetry. No, you studied politics and history at university.
Yes. I did. I had no ambition to write. Basically, I finished university, had no clue what I wanted to do. And I was also feeling a sense of maybe an identity crisis on a smaller level. Like, I didn't know too much about my own family history, and we'd ended up in England accidentally in my mind. We were meant to live in London for a temporary time, but we could never go back because of the war. So I think all of these things have come to the forefront of my mind around that age. And just to start somewhere, I started recording my father's life story, doing interviews with him. And at the same time, there was this guy called Mohamed who I read about, who was a Somali sailor living in Wales in the 1950s, who'd married and had children in Cardiff. And he was accused of a crime he didn't commit and executed in 1952. So part of me wanted to write that story and make a film of it maybe. And at the same time I was doing this research with my dad. And as I learned more about my father's story and how strange and unusual it was, it made me realise that there was something unique here, and it was worth. I'm a big reader. The first job I had outside university was for a film company, but film was something new to me. I was interested in literature, really. And you can write on your own. You don't need a big film company. You don't need money. You can just do it. So the film about Mohamed instead became a book about my father.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much, Nadifa, for just a really riveting insight of your story. I'm very interested in autobiography and also what you describe as not straight autobiography. It's a complex story in itself, and I belong to hear your thoughts about it. But also, you know, there autobiography within African literature, and particularly what we hope literature can do in the world. And not that I want to have a too functional view about that. You know, I don't want to say it does this and therefore we should write. But particularly autobiography and this idea of an authentic story and an untold story, a story that eludes, you know, histories. And I wonder, right now there seems to be a resurgence, if ever there was a decline in interest in autobiography. And certainly in the 1980s, and even before, there was an assumption that what Africans did is we write autobiographies because we only wrote what we knew, and we weren't inventing things, we weren't crafting and making art, we were testifying, which of course is not what was happening then, but I think we have more interesting ideas about autobiography now, even now. But it interests me that there is this enormous resurgence in stretching the genre, you know, reinventing the genre, and I wonder what autobiography is doing at this moment in terms of stretching what we think of as African lives, and maybe also making a political claim, you know, for instance in the context of Somalia, about what we now understand to be that country's politics and what autobiography tells us differently about the country.
It was meant to be a straight biography, that's how I intended the book at the beginning, and I also didn't have any particular desire to publish it even. I just wanted to record my father's story maybe in 15 pages and stick it somewhere in a drawer for my nieces to read when they got older. So it was just meant to be like a document, a historical document almost. But I think two things. Firstly, the fact that my father was like Forrest Gump. He always found himself in historical moments, like he couldn't help himself. He would just stumble into one thing after another. So I loved the idea that, from a historical perspective, that there was this one small person who could elucidate so many other big events. The presence of the colonial empires in East Africa, the war, the creation of Israel, all of these things. And I think also as a reader of non-fiction and fiction, I'd never seen anything like this. So there was a gap there that made me, I think, expand it into something that I could use in a more public way. Autobiography, I think I was reading lots of biographies or autobiographies of child soldiers at the time, which are very straight normally, but in terms of the way they're told. It's just factual, there's no elaboration, or the language isn't too sort of, you know, literary or anything. But the stories they tell are incredible, and they're epic. And in the film we watched last night, I was talking to John afterwards, and you know, these stories of child soldiers or street children and these wanderers, they fit so neatly into that kind of epic form. They're the people who go out and explore and face demons and find new worlds and find love, and then are swept away by fate again. So for me that was a very neat link that emerged quite early on. Another influence was West African traditions. There's this book by Amadou Karuma, Waiting for the Wild Beasts to Vote, and that's told in a mixture of styles. Like it's meant to, there's a griot narrating it, and it's completely like wild the way he tells the story. And it's this life story of an African dictator, and at one point he fights in Vietnam, and so Amadou Karuma stops the narrative there and says, "Let us praise the Viet Cong." And he goes on to a few pages about praising the Viet Cong, and I just loved that. I thought that was fantastic. So those were the kind of influences I had in writing the novel, and in the sense of what purpose did it have. The purpose was to tell a story that's not being told, and also to challenge some of the stories that are always told. Somalia, the books about Somalia are nearly always by Western journalists, and it's either about Black Hawk Down, now it's about piracy, and it's about anarchy, and you know, the most dangerous city on earth. These sorts of things which are repetitive and don't actually bring much information to the table. So there was that I was trying to fight against, as well as this new emerging neo-colonial thinking that was popular. I think it's dying down now, luckily, but it was popular maybe 5-4 years ago when George Bush was in power, basically. So I felt like as a historian I wanted to push back against that, to use my father's story, this area, this region's story, to say, no, you're wrong. This is the way it was. The empires brought anarchy, they brought disease, they brought death.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Nadifa, thank you very much for that. I am wondering, I mean, you've told us differently how you came to writing this project and why and so on. I have a quick sort of twofold question, and I'm interested in what was most joyful for you about this project. And I mean that it doesn't matter whether you're talking about which parts you like writing the most, or I don't know what the kind of joyful surprise was of writing this project, and whether you think that is in any way linked to your next writing project, which I know is a very unfair question because this book is new and so on. But yeah, if you could just give us a sense of your writing
I don't know if you
project.
could ask what was joyful about writing. It's quite heavy, it's quite heavy book. But what was joyful, I like that passage that I just read, that chapter, because like I wrote it after, there's this awful chapter beforehand where my father's fighting in the Second World War, and it's just carnage, absolute carnage. So this was a break for me as well as for the character. And on a kind of more personal level, in writing the book, I became much closer with my father. He was a sailor and he's 50-something years older than me. So when I was growing up, he was like this very, like a distant figure. And we didn't have much contact on a sort of deeper level, really. He organised things for me and stuff like that, and he was interested in my education, but we didn't know each other as people. And I think in the process of writing this, I learned a lot about him. He learned a lot about me, and now we're friends, as well as like parents and child. The second part of the question, I think, having finished this, it took 4.5 years. I was exhausted, and the only idea I had was to write about a more modern time, especially about the dictatorship and the Civil War that made me live in London, basically. We left during the dictatorship, and 2 years afterwards the Civil War, which stopped us ever returning. So I wanted to write about that period, and also the first character that kind of emerged in my mind was of an old woman who's bedbound, and in comparison to a young boy who's too mobile, and you're constantly following him to one country. I was having to learn about Aden and Cairo and Alexandria, these places. I felt like I was travelling with him. So now I've done the opposite in this very housebound novel. And I wrote it just in my house. I didn't do so much research this time. So I think the second book is definitely a reaction to the first one.
Well, thank you very much, Nadifa, for sharing your questions. For now, we're going to introduce the next author.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lin, and I'm very happy to introduce our next guest speaker, Kiguli. So, she is one of the Uganda's leading poets who started writing poetry while she was still at school. And the publication of her first poetry collection, The African Saga, made a literary history in Uganda by selling out in less than a year. She has been an advocate for creative writing in Africa by serving as the chairperson for Uganda Women Writers Association, the FIMWRITE, from 2005 till 2007, and as a judge from Commonwealth Literatures Prize in 1999. The poems she has published already in numerous anthologies. In fact, there are 2 of her poetry collections are now available in Emmanuel House. And I strongly recommend you to have a look and maybe to buy the books. They are awesome. So, besides her very successful writing career, she is also a senior lecturer and the head of the Department of Literature at the University of Makerere in Uganda. Now, I would like to hand over to Susan Kiguli, who will read some of her very beautiful published and unpublished poems.
Thank you very
I would like to start by saying thank you again for the invitation here. It's really a profound time. I like this gathering. It's not too small, it's not too big, so you're able to make connections with people, and that's so wonderful. I'm so happy that the representative from the publishing house, Wanner, who have rescued me from one book wonder, and have published my second collection, is here, Hannah. I'm very pleased that you're here. Now you can hear me read and regret your decision. Right. I'm also taking another risk. My mother died early this year, and I have had one reading in Uganda since her death. I didn't dedicate that reading to her, but I'm going to, this reading, dedicating it to two women, one living, one dead. That is, my mother, for all her greatness, that did not hit the headlines or go to television. The second is dedicated to a poet I really admire, and I'm lucky that she's in this house. She's so much bigger than me, and so I want to tread in the steps of Ali Mazrui. Ali Mazrui always quotes John Drinkwater and says, "When the high heart we magnify and worship greatness passing by, ourselves are great." So I would like to dedicate this to Mom and also to Habiba. I know I don't pronounce her name well, but she has to put up with all these different friends from different countries with funny accents. Right. The first poem I'm going to read is a poem that was inspired by all this talk that I would hear around me. I don't drive in Uganda. I walk or board matatus, that is taxis, and we're all squeezed together and we smell each other's breath and things. It's very exciting. But you also hear lots of things that tell you what's really going on. That you wouldn't hear in your air-conditioned car with windows turned up. So people talk a lot about Western privilege. I thought, why don't I start a series of poems on Ugandan privilege? This is the first one on Ugandan privilege. Ugandan privilege. It's also in my book that is out there, the English and German version.
And that you should buy.
Yes. Ugandan privilege. Today, we talked with a friend about Ugandan privilege as I sat at my window where I have met numerous times before the sun sinking into the clouds among the canopies of green trees. Ugandan privilege offers me my relatives' country homes, surrounded by the great buttressed trees of a tropical forest, the dead silence of night, and the spray of stars in the sky. This country, where grass carpets everywhere, where weeds are found in every crack. This country's pineapples ooze syrup. Bananas are sweeter than sugar. Mango trees look burdened by the weight of their fruit. This country of abundant sun and rain. Today, I was taken by the sway of Ugandan privilege that I would shrivel inside if I suddenly was unable to be part of a favorite neighbor's party or the distant cousin's wedding, and the impulsive feasts that conquer the village at the whiff of good fortune. Ugandan privilege presents me with people at each other's tables, with each other's joys, sharing each other's sorrows, enjoying the town's gossip, and stopping to help a stranger. Today, I sat with the wonders of my people and hung on to the spirit of Uganda. I wanted to read with this woman beside me. Smart. The second poem I'm going to read. I'm sorry, my poem, I've always desired my poems to be funny, but they're not. You know, that's how it happens. Maybe I should desire them to be sad so they become happy. The second poem I'm going to read was inspired by, actually I was here on a poet's residence on the island of Zut in the North Sea. And I saw this painting by a Ugandan painter called Nadifa. It's entitled At Peace with Each Other. The people were so beautiful and they were hugging each other. And I wrote this poem, Love, influenced by Nadifa's painting entitled At Peace with Each Other. Will our children know and hold beauty like a permanent magnet? Will they know tenderness in the vivid colors of the sun and the rainbow? Will our children know quiet contentment in living daily with each other and trusting to the future? Will our children say love is being close without words? Will our children know love better than us who have lived these times of anger? Will our children be beautiful in their youth better than us who discovered youth cannot be forever? Will our children's arms be strong enough to embrace each other? Will our children get time to close their eyes, feel the energies of each other without gunfire forcing them open and closing them forever? Will our children conquer our dismembered past and rid our crimes to shun our punishment? Will they reconstitute our joys and throw away our tears? Will our children know and live love despite the guns, the mass graves, the children abducted to service our wars? Will our children lay these loads down and live love? The third poem I'm going to read is also in my new book, and it's quite a recent poem. It's called Such Are the Times. In the recent years in Uganda, we've just been bombarded with so much police brutality. And it is played before our cameras like comedy, like a movie, you know, someone aiming a gun at someone and shooting, and, you know, someone in the stomach and they fall there, and then another one comes, then they hit the doors and enter, and the police is really cultivating, you know, this image of violence around them, untouchable, and the government defends them because, you know, Ugandans are rowdy and they shout about nothing. They need to be, you know, put in order. And I was on the plane reading Samuel Beckett's Endgame, the play Endgame, and these lines from his play hit me, and I used them as a quote to preface my poem. They said, "Yes, one day you will know what it is. You will be like me, except that you won't have anyone with you, because you won't have pity on anyone, and because there won't be anyone left to have pity on." This poem is in two parts. The first part, the lake rages and eclipses a rainbow. Such are the times. The phantoms in the sky are constantly changing. They show no mercy and feel no pity. They charge down arbitrarily in fury, realizing later that they hit the wrong target. fear cannot tell faces apart. The hills appear as if from afar, hanging out of the sky. They are rugged and red in places, cold and aloof. They erupt in fire, consuming helpless people. The clouds are banking on the edges of the sky. Around them is a desert full of dry bones. Part 2. The leaders smile as they buy bananas from a street vendor, who smiles back. All the newspapers will carry the photograph tomorrow, a photograph with the leaders. What does it matter that vendors' children never know schools, hospitals, and houses? The leaders appear on national television, explaining high taxes levied on essential commodities. The leaders appear stern, with their bodyguards alert. The revenue is to build key infrastructures on which development depends, they say. What does it matter that the main hospitals are sewage dumps, where patients huddle together in torn and soiled blankets? Such are the times. This poem is a very odd one, and it's called Mother Sing a Lullaby, and it was, I wrote it after the 1994 Rwandan genocide. Mother sing a lullaby. Mother sing a lullaby as the dark descends on trees, shutting out shadows. The sensuous voices swish and swirl around shrubs and overgrown grass, hiding mountains of decapitated dead and the glint of machetes that slashed shrieking throats. In these camps without happiness, mothers maintain the melody of life, capturing wistful wind to sing strength into the souls of children who have never known the taste of morning porridge or heard the chirp of crickets in the evenings. Mothers sing a lullaby for the staring faces who cringe at the sound of footsteps, whose playmates are grinning skeletons. Mothers become a lullaby, silencing the sirens of sorrow, restoring compassion to the nation. The next poem is rather long, and it came out, I wanted to write something that touched best with home. I was in England and I was feeling, I had idealized home to a point. It looked like paradise. Everything I thought about home was really, I just wanted to be home. Of course, when I went home, it was a different story. But never mind about that. Another day. But, and I became very defensive about Uganda, even defended Amin. So, and this came out of wanting to touch base with home, but it also came out of an encounter with one friend called, she's dead now, the late Bonnie Schulenberger, who kept asking me, why don't you, I kept complaining about the creation myth in Uganda, they are so male, you see. For example, in the one that I based this poem on, the creation myth from My People, the Baganda, you have this goddess that comes down from the sky and meets this man whose name means thing, and he's eating dung, cow dung, and he is drinking urine for wine, you know. But the goddess comes down, admires him, goes back with him to heaven, and she wants to marry him, but she makes many mistakes. And because of the many mistakes she makes, the man turns around in self-righteous anger and says, you shall serve me, you shall kneel down. I like the stories about people. You shall kneel down when serving me, because you make mistakes, you need to be corrected. So the goddess is brought down to the, you know, the level of this thing that was eating her down. I wrote this poem. It is called Tongue, Touch, Nambi Myth. The creation myth is called Nambi and Kintu myth, but I call it Tongue, Touch, Nambi Myth. Nambi, daughter of God, unfolds the stairway of heaven for a glimpse of a world away from the elevation of the skies. On earth, her eyes lie on a man who eats dung for food, urine for wine. Her eyes repose, and the daughter of God lends vision desire. She creates a language desire. She says, there is a banquet in heaven. Come, my arms will support your flight. Come to where rivers wave wastes and hills sit cross-legged, where trees swing yellow fruit and mountains wear snow crowns, where cows have long conversations with swans and streams murmur to gesturing reeds. Come, witness the laughter of waterfalls, laughter that dives into rocks and glides over space, spraying souls with dizziness of freedom and shock of courage. Come, see the mirrors in the stream, how they turn faces over, shaping unimaginable possibilities. See how they tease you with what you know and make a mark on chances of discovery. The rolling stream is your seeing your contradictions, like feathers floating in the midriff of a slithering brook. Come, enter into our heaven and let your cow graze among ours. Become part of our being. Do not seek to understand our habits. Venture to know them. I'm part of our world. I live here as my father's daughter. I do not seek to deny my paternity, nor do I dissolve my individuality. Look, I'm a community and yet a single soul. I choose to come with you. I choose my walk. I see my point of exit. I come with the pride of my knowing. I choose to descend to earth to make my own world. Come, listen, I have a tale to tell. I descend to earth with seed from my father's fields, with cattle from his crop. I come to live in my own world. Look, I bring my father's banana trees, but I do the planting. I fashion out my garden. I water my own fruit. Look, I take the millet seed and plant my own millet field. I make my own life. I have a tale to tell. I make my own path to make a meeting place, to unplace these stones, to make a meeting place, to provide a talking place, to bear an idea heaven. Listen, I'm telling a tale. Anchored in my body is my mother, holding me together. I take many forms. Where I touch, life grows. Death, raging in oblique turbulence, is not my relative. I did not invite him here or bring him in the arms of rebellion. I cultivate a circular field, no tree behind the other. Life sings in the branches. I, from the inside, make the outside, forming a place where our daughters and sons shall raise their faces, shall reach out with their arms as far as those mountains which dwell in the clouds. I call from the compound, putting thatch upon this roof. Every blade is adding shape. Every stalk points upward to freer spaces. Listen, I'm singing a song within this town, a harmony where our daughters' voices are clear and strong. Dawned in the beams of a daring sun, daughters defy the silence in the smog of time, pronouncing the presence, of resolute voices. The next 3 points, I'll go through them quite fast. This one is called plain speaking, and I won't tell you anything about it. Yes, plain speaking. They call this country mother and rape its women, abduct its girls, force them into slavery. They call this country mother, drive its women into exchanging their children for guns. They call this country mother and declare to its women, you are nothing without husbands. They call this country mother, push its women to their knees to worship hunger, homelessness, and horror. They call this country mother, launch wars to fill their vaults with gold, while the children fleeing fire drown into nowhere. They call this country mother, loot land, devour people, defeat the future. This second last poem is called Guilty. You know, I tried to record the many feelings that I thought we are many girls in the family. The many feelings that I thought we had with our mother. And the times we would gossip about her and say, oh, she's so controlling. Oh, she wants this or the other. Or sometimes say, isn't our mother so beautiful? We know you've never seen any woman as beautiful as her. You know, and all these things. And I tried to write this poem. Although it's about mothers, it was mainly inspired by a family friend who I dedicated the poem to, called Mrs. Dorothy O'Neill. I was guilty at 4 of loathing our mother's sense of diet. They knew nothing save for flaccid vegetables, snewy pineapples, and tangy oranges. I was guilty at 8 of thinking that all our mothers were fashion gurus, beauty queens, story storehouses, and boundless treasure hunts. I was guilty at 16 of regarding our mothers irrelevant interfering women with the exasperating habit of mind reading, second guessing, and disaster prediction. I was guilty at 24 of suspecting all our mothers of incurable matchmaking, of approving the world's most infamous nuts for boyfriends, of reminding us of family obligations. I'm guilty now of constantly praying for our mother's safekeeping, for hoarding all the cryptic comments we received when ears heard but hardly listened, for coveting the way they carry age like accolades, for longing insatiably for their cooking, for their ability to prepare matoke, malakwang, and millet, and to bake roast, pie, and cake, for their defiance of hard times when sugar and salt were scarce, for their belief in their faith and values. I'm guilty of wishing to take all the soul of their generation, to use it to redeem ours. People, I'm guilty of mother worship. The last poem I'm reading today is in my new book tour. I thought I would read something that connects to German in a way. This poem I wrote on the island of Zut, which is like when they want to punish you for roving around too much, they give you a poet's residence and they tell you go there for a month, you see nobody, you see only these rich people walking their dogs. But the island is so beautiful. This is the last poem. The island is so beautiful. and this poem is called Again, the Island of Zut. The yellow light in the sky fluoresces in the dark. A big ship like a surfer breaks through the waves. The seagulls like twins on the aquamarine water. One solitary dove perched on a pole. A plant red like fire circles the green crater-like hills, wild like unkempt hair, framing stretches of beach. The tide now low, the water moves away. Suddenly, children can play on the shore, digging wet sand, building castles. The water here plays a beguiling game, with huge waves jumping at each other like choleric lions, and smaller ones paddling like poodles. It is hard not to fall in love. The sun paving shimmering roadways in water, stubbornly refusing me to stare at its face. Walking the length of this beach, digging my heels into the sand, watching designs of 1,000 souls imprinted here, and all the abandoned castles in the sun, and the glassy brown pod-like shells, I'm falling in love.
Thank you very much, Kiguli, for sharing all these very wonderful points with us. The beauty in all these films is not limited to any time and place. I can tell from the audience face, I think you probably share the similar feelings as me. So, are there any comments or questions so far for our author, or you would simply like to share your feelings after hearing such wonderful poems? Yeah.
Yeah, very inspiring, Susan, and I think I could talk up to tomorrow about the accolades. So let me just say, this was very interesting, and I think I particularly appreciate you mentioning how important researching in the what you call matatus in Uganda. For us, we normally call them taxis, and I always say these days when people say, what methodology are you using? For me, there is no richer place to do research. That's why it is hard for me to operate outside my country, because the kind of knowledge, the kind of research material I get in a taxi, I cannot get in any book that I get, because if the president says something, one thing beautiful about a taxi is you get an age range, you get a class range, you get people who did eat in the morning, and those who had a very good breakfast, and those who are very mad, and those who are happy. But one topic is discussed and everybody joins in, and you get to see a cross-section. So I was very happy. I actually believe we need to start working on a Matatu methodology. I'm not even joking. This is something which I've put pen to paper and I've talked about it, that we need to know how to do the research when you are inside that taxi, because you can also get out without getting exactly what you're looking for. You need to understand, like, where to sit, and who sits where, and all these taxis. There are all these dynamics, and then there's this one passenger who never talks throughout, and then one time they will make a comment that probably summarizes everything that has been discussed. So you need to know, for example, if it's a short distance, which is the best part to come in and do all of that. So I'm not even lying. This is something which those who do research in African countries, I'm seriously saying this is a methodology we need to work at. And I'm very happy that you actually point out that as something that is important. What I wanted to ask was, number one, I see that you read with a lot of passion and you believe in what you're doing. Do you write or think of what you're doing in Uganda, or do you think in English? The reason I'm asking this is, in other words, are you Achebe in your language approach, or are you Buki in your language approach? Okay? Because for you as a writer, I've always wondered, at which point does translation happen here? Or does it ever happen? You just wake up and you are thinking in this diction, or do you translate it? Number two, Do you have problems in terms of using this for promotion at work? The reason I'm asking this is I have written before and been told to my face that, look, you are a literature person. You are not here to write short stories and write novels. And as a result, in Malawi, very few Malawians, so our students are not reading us because we are not writing. When we write, it doesn't help us in terms of, I'm talking about creative writing. Okay? So I would like to know, what is the scene like in Uganda? Are you able to say, I want to be promoted, here's my book of poems? Are they able to take it, or do they say, no, that's something else. That's not what we are paying you to do. We were expecting you to use, they actually told me they need things that employ theory. And I don't understand why people can't see that this takes theory too. I think and then the concept of home. And I think this, I was linking it with the first reader, because I mean, when you're writing from diaspora, and then you are in there, but at the end of the day, I see home is destabilized by a lot of things. For example, the whole issue of police brutality, which is very big in my home too. I think we are seeing lots of normativization of violence on TV, and I'm very happy you pointed out the issue of people normalizing, making it normal that there's something wrong with being Malawian, you know. Or, you know, we need to control Malawians. Malawians are going out of hand, and you even see this being said publicly. Pathology and it being institutionalized, therefore allowing the police to do that. So just your concept of home, I thought, thank you for bringing that up. I don't think you need to speak to that more, but I just thought it's interesting to read how you construct home on the back of what Nadifa was reading.
I will be very fast, because I think I timed these poems before, but it seems that maybe they were a bit long. I can see my presenter was beginning to plan. So I will be as quick as possible. And any questions I forget, maybe we will have a discussion after. First, the one I remember most is that I haven't been allowed to use my poems for promotion. That is a no-no. They told me it's a hobby. Yes, it's a hobby, but my colleagues have written articles on these poems, and they have gotten promotion on writing these. They get promotion on writing these, but mine is a hobby. However many books I produce, and in Uganda we also writers, I think, really do not have. We try, but the space is constrained in terms of recognition of what contribution. The president said one time that all people should come back, except those that have studied Shakespeare. The diaspora can keep them because they have nothing to contribute. Then sometimes he contradicts himself by quoting from a writer. So I want to answer the second question now. It's okay. I've forgotten it, but I will answer it because it was important, but I've forgotten what it is. I didn't write it down.
We have limitation, so we have to answer this question here. But basically, thank you very much, Susan, for sharing with us our poems. And if any of you would like to discuss with Susan later, you are very welcome to approach her. And now I have to hand over to my colleague, Viraya, to introduce the next author.
Thank you very much. I am honored to introduce you one of the Africa's most promising young authors, Zukiswa Wanner. Zukiswa Wanner was born in Zambia, and she grew up in Zimbabwe. She completed the undergraduate degree in Honolulu.
She is a founder of RIS SA, foundation which is a writer initiation campaign for the South Africans to donate books to the place that have never got that book before. Also, Wanner has written several books, novels, international online journals, and also essays to many publishing companies. For example, The Guardian, the Elle, etc. One of her novels, Men of the South, was shortlisted for 2011 Commonwealth Prize, and also the Herman Charles Bosman Award. Right now, in the year 2012, she has written 2 children's books called Refuel, an African adaptation of the classic tale of Rapunzel, and another book, Yama Love Bananas, a book for toddlers. And today, Wanner is going to read us her debut novels, The Madame, published in 2006, and also was shortlisted for the K. Solo Dunkel Award in 2007. Please welcome Wanner.
Thank you, Mirai. I actually had planned that I was going to be reading from Men of the South, but then owing to the discourse that I've received during this festival, I decided I'd actually read from the Madams. Part of the reason was yesterday when Khabima was doing a presentation and she was talking about the P word, and when she was quoting Pumla on the whole colored issue, and that's one of the things that the main character called Tandy in the Madams is talking about. And here goes. And then there's me. I like to think I was given the name Tandy because of the great love that I know my parents have for each other. I'm neither silver spoon nor wooden spoon born, but an average South African. Although both Sis and Lauren claim that I'm more South African than I'll ever be, and that, with my immense global experience, I'm far from being average. Although when I describe myself as an average South African, I'm talking of South Africa being a middle-income country, developmentally speaking, and yours truly being a middle-class person, which makes you an average citizen. But having dished the dirt, my friends, I'll tell you the biased version of my own story. It goes like this. My father and my mother will be referred to as colored, whatever color that is, during the apartheid era, and even today in South Africa's post-apartheid days. They were both politically active, joining the African National Congress in border jumping at a time when other so-called coloreds were just grateful that in spite of the hardships of the apartheid regime, they still had it better than to use the terminology of that dark shadow in our nation's history, Catholics. My father left South Africa in 1970 and joined Umkhonto Sizwe in Tanzania, and that is where he met my mother. I was born in Dar es Salaam, where my father was undergoing military training, and my mother had every woman's dream job at that time, the highly esteemed role of a typist. My paternal grandfather was a Scotsman who had an affair with his former maid, my grandmother. The result of this union was my father. I grew up with an aversion towards white men, as my father had told me that my grandmother was raped. Whether it was that my father read too many Malcolm X speeches, or simply a sign of the times in which he grew up, my father tended to exaggerate. It was only when I came back home as a young adult that I realized that my Malcolm would never have been raped. Her boss was definitely guilty of sexual exploitation, but the grandmother I knew, who spoke her mind to one and all, would never have been forced into sex. Even the white sergeants at Orlando Police Station knew not to mess with her. My take on it, after knowing it, is that perhaps she thought she'd be able to do a coup d'etat on the missus, but when the missus found out, she got fired and became a liquor trader on the alternative market, also known as the black market. Which is how she put my father through school. If my father wants to justify the fact that he's strongly anti-white by stating that his mother was raped, I let him be. What surprises me is that he chose the ANC as a political home as opposed to the blacker and back then more militant Pan-Africanist Congress. It may Just before my senior year, while on summer vacation in New York, I met Mandla at a party at Lizo's Manhattan flat. He had driven all the way from DC to attend the party with a few other South African get crushes, but all of us were homesick and any South African passport was welcome. The world did not stop turning. There were no sparks in the air. Images did not start moving in slow motion. Rather, we chatted for a bit, exchanged numbers, and became friends. We talked regularly, and when we returned home, I suppose for lack of choice, I guessed. Mandla and I gravitated towards each other, and here we are, 7 years later, with a 5-year-old son and a 6-year-old marriage. When Mandla proposed, there was no picnic basket in the park, no jet flying overhead scripting, "Tandile, will you marry me?" It was more a realization as we loaded the trunk of his car after a joint grocery shopping excursion, that moving from one apartment to another each week was getting ridiculous. As we got into the car, he said to me, "Babes, buying the same groceries for 2 places is absurd. Why don't we just get married?" Sure, it was hardly romantic. But I said yes. After all, Mandla was intelligent, he had a great career ahead of him, he loved me, and he was a great shag. So he needed a little help in the romance department, but I had a whole lifetime to work on that. And I flatter myself that I was not a bad catch for him either, otherwise he would not have wanted to buy the restaurant when he got free meals. Those who know me refer to me as black, because that is what I am. But many who do not know me refer to me, maybe due to my caramel complexion and none too fro afro, as colored. I honestly dislike the term, and I recall getting into a bit of conflict with another so-called colored who told me I did not have pride in my heritage. Now, with all due respect, I cannot very well celebrate my European ancestors who never loved enough to acknowledge their offspring. My African ancestors, on the other hand, have always loved unstintingly and supported unconditionally. So why celebrate those who did not love? Besides, anyone who's traveled knows if you got a drop of black, you're just a nigger. And you suffer from the same prejudices and mistreatment all the other niggers be getting. But maybe she's right. Maybe sometimes I tend to overcompensate in order to fit in, just as other biracial, as the Brits like to call us, children tend to do in order to be welcomed by our darker kinsfolk. I mean, just a look at history is enough to highlight this. Malcolm X was biracial, and his grandfather, like mine, was white, and he detested white people with a passion. Bob Marley wrote many controversial songs directed at his white ancestors. Somehow it's always the blackness that is celebrated. Is it possible that the black ancestral blood running through their veins comes back to haunt white people through the cultural loss of their children? Of course, if this is the case, the black South African ancestors, apart from my parents and a few others, have remained rather passive in that respect. Perhaps I'm seeking revenge for my black ancestors by doing the white maid thing. Granted, since I'll be paying her more than the minimum labor allowance set by the Domestic Workers Union, it's more like fair employment than revenge. But I cannot help feeling some sort of glee in the darkest chamber of my dark heart that years to yell at middle-income white people with black maids. We're all equal after all. You got a black maid and I have a white one. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Zukiswa, and for the reading and also for the song to all of you. Well, are there any questions concerning the reading or the others? Yeah.
So just out of my curiosity, do you maybe identify yourself with one of the characters or the combination of the characters?
None of the above.
None of those. Okay, because I was expecting.
Well, I suppose there's a bit of biography in everything that every writer writes anyway, whether it's science fiction or yeah. So certainly there are certain things that are drawn from my friends and yeah, and my family and my life. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. I was just impressed by the kind of view that comes out in your writing. I think it's just wonderful. And I mean, especially the performance of the you as you were reading. I don't think people who've bought your books and not seen you read will be the same. Thank you very much. I think you gave it very good framing. My question is on the issue of nation and your writing. I think, I mean, listening to you're born in Zambia, you grew up, blah, blah, and this and that. I've noticed that when writers are doing well or they're saying something which other people like, there's a tendency to, you know, there are writers who are Malawian when they're not doing well, and when they're doing fine, you see that people like Cereza, for example, he is from Malawi, but he grew up in Zimbabwe. There are places where he's labeled Zimbabwean, then there are places where he's labeled Malawian, and then sometimes, the American-based scholar, you know. In other words, the way labels, and in your case, because you've got this rainbow of nations around you, how has that impacted the reception of your writing? In terms of, do you get this schizophrenic reaction where this morning someone writes about you as Zimbabwean, tomorrow you become, they throw you out depending on whether they like what you're saying and you become something else. Do you have that? And I'm asking this especially because I think I want to congratulate you on being very brave to take on the question of race and class and how it constructs identities. And I know very well that this must sit very uncomfortably with many people. You know, there are people who are just like, she did not say that. Did she just mention that? You know? And which is what I mean, you know, pushing the boundaries. How has this impacted in terms of nation and identity?
It's actually been very, very interesting. When the Madams first came out, I think a month after it came out, there was a review in the Zambian Post, and it said Zambian-born writer Zukiswa, and I was really chuffed about it because similarly, like, you know, South African media, depending on how they're loving me or not, will generally refer to me as South African writer Zukiswa. That's when they're loving me, or they'll say Zimbabwean red writer. Or, you know, it depends. But I personally just don't see it as a limitation. I actually see it as opportunity because it opens me up to a bigger market. And now that I'm staying in Kenya, I get there, and depending on the crowd that I'm with, if they're very loyal Kenyans, I'm like, I'm also Kenyan, you know. And if they rather like the exotic, then I say, oh yeah, as a South African, you know. So yeah, it's worked out very well. Obviously, certain things don't translate as well. Because, for instance, race is not that big of an issue in East Africa. Although the book has been very well received there, and we're doing a reprint there and doing a relaunch and stuff and everything in about a month and a half's time. Yeah, so.
Thank you all very much. I just wanted to return to a question that was actually posed after Susan Kiguli read, and I want to pose it to all the panelists, if that's okay. Yes, okay. Or whatever there's time for. I was curious about the question of language and translation, and yeah, I was really interested in that question. And I don't know what everybody's first and second and third languages are, but I'm curious about what language, when you're writing, you're thinking in, and where the process of translation does or doesn't happen.
Thank you for reminding me, but I was not nagging me, wondering what question I forgot. But when I start panicking about time, I write both, and I write in two languages mainly, Luganda and English. Now I've been translated into German, and I was at some point translated into Spanish, and I've been translated into Finnish. But I write in Luganda and in English. My English, writing in English preceded my writing in Uganda. Then I went to Britain and decided that I needed to write in the language that people identify me with. When I was growing up in Uganda, I didn't kind of get the feeling that I was black and white and Britain and Uganda. In Britain, I came to know from people who exactly. When are you going back home? So how long are you staying? So I decided to write in Luganda as almost an ideological or political decision to just define myself with the language of the people that I interacted with at home. Unfortunately, the publishing industry in Uganda does not support much African language, writing in African languages. So I have performed my poems written in Uganda. They appear in magazines, but I have no collection, even though there are quite many. But the languages pull against each other. I started speaking Luganda at the same time I started speaking English. So, of course, I say English is my second language, but Luganda might as well also be, because I learned it at exactly the same time, and I was in boarding school, so I had to speak English all the time. I only spoke Luganda when I went for holidays. But still, it's the language of my grandmother. It's the language of my father. It has those sentiments, the language of my mother. So I feel like I must write in that language. Even when they don't publish it, at least it's there. I have written in it. It makes me feel better.
Yeah, everyone, one more question before the
I just to answer that, I just, when it's curse words, I certainly think of them in English, but anything else, I translate in my head.
Oh, okay. Yes, I think in English, my first language is Somali, my birth language, and I only really use it now with my mother. She refused to learn English, so that enforced my Somali. And I think the biggest test is always when you dream. What language do you dream in? And 90% of my dreams are in English and in colour. But what I find interesting is if my grandmother appears in a dream, then I speak Somali. So certain parts of your brain, I think, hold memories in different languages.
About your work in Read Essay, partly because I think you're as well known and appreciated for your activism around making African literature visible, and I wondered how continental that is, how international that is, and why it is important for you. Is it working?
Well, it's probably important to me because I need to eat. But well, it was certainly working quite a bit in South Africa, and obviously the writers were still in South Africa doing the same thing, but it's something that I have been doing even in Kenya. I visit schools in Western Kenya, and I talk to students, and I do writing workshops, and so forth and so on. And I did quite a few workshops as well when I was in South Africa earlier on this year, last month, and the month before. So yeah, it seems to be working because there is certainly a great appreciation and understanding for literature. But people are also going into bookstores because initially, and they ask for books. They don't just go and look at in South African bookstores, there's a little shelf like this called the Africana, and it takes care of all writers from Algeria to Zimbabwe, you know. But yeah, and generally you are very lucky if you are one of those, if you manage to get yourself on that shelf. And when you go and you ask for a book, you'll say, oh, can I get a copy of Men of the South? They'll say to you, oh, it's sold out. And you say to them, oh, how many copies did you order? And they say 5. And you say, it's sold out when, oh, 4 months ago. You know? So, but because more and more people are coming and actually asking for these books, as opposed to just leaving the shelves, African writers, I had a workshop with Ellen Bandaku in Pietermaritzburg last year, and the children loved it, and they loved her, and I've used her books as well when I go to schools in Western Kenya. So yeah, I think, obviously there's room for much more improvement, and it would be lovely if more writers could just be as passionate, but perhaps busier with their writing lives, drinking wine.
Thank you very much. And also for your attention. Now, time for coffee break.
Can I just, we'll resume, I think, in half an hour. Sorry. Yes, and I would like to ask the authors to sign this beautiful board. And my very, very last announcement, some of you came a little later, but we're going to have a cabinet photo taken after the panel discussion.